Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected places, not in fancy restaurants or romantic getaways, but in the raw moments when humanity shows its truest colors. This is the story of Marcus Williams, a 34-year-old construction worker from Detroit, and Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old teacher who had lost everything. Their love story didn't start with flowers or candlelit dinners. It started with rain, compassion, and a simple act of kindness that would change both their lives forever. What happens when two broken souls find each other in the darkest of times? What happens when love blooms from the soil of struggle? This is not just a love story. This is a testament to the power of human connection, the strength found in vulnerability, and the incredible journey that begins when one person decides to see another's worth, even when they can't see it themselves. Marcus never imagined that stopping his old pickup truck on a rainy Thursday evening would lead him to the love of his life. Sarah never dreamed that accepting help from a stranger would be the first step toward rebuilding everything she had lost. But sometimes, the universe has plans that are bigger than our fears, stronger than our past, and more beautiful than we ever dared to imagine. This is their story, a story that proves love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it whispers through raindrops and grows in the quiet moments between two hearts learning to trust again. The rain came down like bullets that Thursday evening, each drop hitting the Detroit pavement with the fury of a storm that seemed to mirror the chaos in Sarah Mitchell's heart. She pressed herself deeper into the doorway of the abandoned building on Corktown's east side, her thin jacket doing little to protect her from the cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. 3 months. That's how long she had been living on the streets, and still, she couldn't quite believe this was her reality. Sarah pulled her knees closer to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The cardboard beneath her had long since turned to mush, offering no barrier between her and the concrete that seemed determined to steal whatever warmth remained in her body. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a familiar companion that had become as constant as her shadow. The last real meal she'd had was 2 days ago at the shelter, but they were full up tonight, and the waiting list stretched longer than her hope. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be warm, to be safe, to belong somewhere. Sarah Mitchell had been a third-grade teacher at Roosevelt Elementary for 6 years. She had a small apartment with plants on the windowsill, a cat named Whiskers, and students who drew her pictures that she kept pinned to her refrigerator. She had a life, a purpose, a future. That was before the diagnosis. The words still echoed in her mind like a broken record. Stage 3 breast cancer. At 28, Sarah thought she was invincible. She thought she had time to save money, time to get better insurance, time to build the kind of support system that could weather any storm. She was wrong on all counts. The medical bills came like an avalanche. First, they took her savings. Then her car. Then her apartment. When the treatments made her too sick to work, she lost her job, and, with it, her insurance. It was a cruel cycle that seemed designed to crush the very people who were already fighting for their lives. The cancer was in remission now, but the damage was done. Sarah had nothing left except the clothes on her back and a fierce pride that made asking for help feel like swallowing glass. She had tried calling old friends, former colleagues, anyone who might remember the person she used to be. But poverty has a way of making people uncomfortable, and cancer has a way of making them afraid. One by one, the people she thought she could count on found reasons to keep their distance. The rain intensified, and Sarah pulled her hood up, though it was already soaked through. She watched the headlights of passing cars create rivers of light on the wet asphalt, each one carrying people to homes she could only imagine. Warm homes with hot meals and dry beds, and people who loved them enough to worry when they were late coming home. She tried not to think about what those people would think if they saw her now, tried not to imagine the judgment in their eyes or the way they would hurry past, afraid that whatever had happened to her might be contagious. That's when she saw the pickup truck slow down. At first, Sarah thought it was just traffic, but the truck pulled over to the curb about 20 feet from where she sat. She tensed, every instinct screaming at her to run. Living on the streets had taught her that when strangers stopped, it usually meant trouble. She had learned to trust her gut, and, right now, her gut was telling her to disappear into the shadows. But she was tired. so bone-deep tired that even fear couldn't motivate her legs to move. She watched as a man got out of the truck, his movements careful and deliberate. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work boots and jeans that had seen better days. His skin was dark, and when he turned his face toward the streetlight, she could see concern etched in his features. He looked to be in his 30s, with kind eyes that seemed to be searching for something. Marcus Williams had been driving home from his job at the construction site when he spotted her. He almost didn't stop. In a city like Detroit, homelessness was unfortunately common, and Marcus had learned the hard way that not every good intention led to good outcomes. But something about the small figure huddled in the doorway made him hit the brakes. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like she was trying to disappear. Maybe it was the fact that she looked so young, too young to be alone on the streets in weather like this. Or maybe it was because he remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be the person everyone walked past without seeing. Marcus had grown up in Detroit's East Side, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and hope was a luxury most families couldn't afford. He knew what it was like to be hungry, to wear the same clothes day after day, to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. His mother, Gloria, had worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads after his father left when Marcus was 12. There were nights when she would give Marcus her portion of dinner and claim she wasn't hungry, nights when she would stay up late mending his clothes because buying new ones wasn't an option. But Gloria Williams had instilled something powerful in her son, the belief that kindness was not a luxury, but a responsibility. "Baby," she used to say, "when you see someone drowning, you don't ask them how they fell in the water. You throw them a rope." Marcus carried those words with him every day, and tonight, they echoed louder than the rain. He approached slowly, his hands visible, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. When he got close enough to see her clearly, his heart nearly broke. She couldn't have been much older than his sister would have been if his sister had lived. Her clothes were soaked, her lips were blue from cold, and there was a look in her eyes that he recognized all too well. It was the look of someone who had been disappointed so many times that hope had become dangerous. "Miss," Marcus called out, his voice gentle but loud enough to be heard over the rain. "You okay?" Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She took in his appearance, searching for signs of threat, for the telltale signs that had learned to recognize in her months on the street. But all she saw was genuine concern and a kindness that seemed almost foreign after so much time surrounded by indifference. "I'm fine," she lied, the words automatic. It was what she always said, what she had to say. Admitting otherwise felt like admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready to wave that white flag yet. Marcus nodded, though they both knew she wasn't fine. No one sitting in a doorway in a downpour was fine. "Listen, I know you don't know me, and you got no reason to trust me, but it's nasty out here tonight. I got a warm truck, and there's a diner about 10 minutes away. They serve good coffee, and the owner, Danny, he's good people. Would you let me give you a ride? Get you somewhere warm and dry?" Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. Every self-preservation instinct she had developed screamed at her to say no. She had heard too many stories, seen too many women who had trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. But she was so cold, and the rain showed no signs of stopping, and there was something in this man's eyes that reminded her of her grandfather, a man who had never broken a promise in his life. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Why would you want to help me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. He could tell her about his mother's lessons, about the time strangers had helped his family when they needed it most. He could talk about paying it forward or doing the right thing. But something about this woman, about the way she sat so still in the rain like she was afraid of taking up too much space in the world, made him want to be honest. "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it," he said simply. "And because everyone deserves to be warm on a night like this." Sarah looked into his eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff from cold and sitting too long in one position. "Okay," she said, the word coming out like a prayer. "Okay." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made tiny lines appear at the corners. "My name's Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Sarah," she replied, taking his hand briefly. His palm was warm and calloused from work, the hand of someone who built things, who created rather than destroyed. As they walked to his truck, Marcus kept a respectful distance, letting her set the pace. The truck was old but clean, with fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror and a small cross on the dashboard. The seats were covered with towels, which Marcus explained apologetically were there to protect the upholstery from his work clothes. He cranked up the heat and handed her another towel from behind the seat. "For your hair," he said, not looking at her directly to give her some privacy. As warmth began to seep back into her body, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. Not the kind of safety that came from locked doors or security systems, but the kind that came from human kindness, from being seen and valued by another person. She watched Marcus as he drove, noting the way he checked his mirrors carefully, the way he signaled even when there was no one around to see it. There was something steady about him, something solid that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. They didn't talk much during the ride, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came when two people were both lost in their own thoughts, both trying to process an unexpected moment of connection. Marcus kept glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, wondering what her story was, what had led her to that doorway on a night like this. Sarah stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, trying to remember the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. When they pulled up to Danny's diner, Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. The place was bright and warm, full of people who belonged somewhere. She suddenly became acutely aware of how she must look, how she must smell, how out of place she would be among the families and couples sharing late dinners. But Marcus seemed to sense her hesitation. "Danny's good people," he said again, his voice gentle. "And everyone's got a story. Nobody's going to judge you here." As they walked toward the entrance, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass door. She barely recognized herself. Her hair was stringy and dull, her clothes hung loose on her too thin frame, and there was a hollowness in her eyes that spoke of too many hungry days and sleepless nights. But when she looked at Marcus's reflection beside her, she saw something that surprised her. She saw herself the way he seemed to see her, not as a homeless woman or a charity case, but as a person worthy of kindness, worthy of a warm meal and a dry place to sit. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and several heads turned their way. Sarah felt the familiar flush of shame creep up her neck, but Marcus's steady presence beside her helped her keep her chin up. He guided her to a booth in the back, away from the other customers, but still within the warm circle of light that made the diner feel like a sanctuary. As they sat down across from each other, Sarah realized that this was the first time in months that she had sat across from another person as an equal, as someone worth sharing a meal with. The thought brought unexpected tears to her eyes, and she quickly looked down at the plastic menu, blinking hard. Marcus pretended not to notice her tears, instead flagging down the waitress with a gentle wave. "2 coffees, please, Linda. And maybe some of that soup if you got it. It's cold out there tonight." Linda, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, brought over 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a basket of crackers. "Soup will be right up, honey," she said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she had served plenty of people who needed more than just food. As Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug, feeling the heat seep through her palms and up her arms, she looked across the table at Marcus. He was stirring sugar into his coffee, his movements slow and thoughtful, giving her time to process everything that had happened in the last hour. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate for everything she was feeling. Marcus looked up and smiled, that same genuine smile that had convinced her to true the soup arrived in a white ceramic bowl, steam rising from the chicken broth like incense in a church. Sarah stared at it for a long moment, overwhelmed by something as simple as hot food served on a real plate with a real spoon. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the spoon, and she hoped Marcus wouldn't notice. But, of course, he did notice, because Marcus Williams was the kind of man who paid attention to the details that mattered. He busied himself with his own meal, a burger that he had ordered more to give Sarah company than because he was particularly hungry. He had eaten dinner hours ago with his crew, sharing Chinese takeout in the trailer on the construction site while they went over tomorrow's plans. But something told him that this woman across from him hadn't had a proper meal in days, maybe weeks, and he understood the dignity that came with eating together rather than being watched like a zoo animal. Sarah took her first spoonful and had to close her eyes as the warmth spread through her body. She couldn't remember the last time something had tasted so good. Not because it was particularly exceptional soup, but because it represented everything she had lost and was afraid she would never have again. Warmth, comfort, the simple pleasure of nourishment. She ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying to savor each bite, while also being acutely aware that this kindness was temporary. "So," Marcus said after a while, his voice casual but gentle, "you from Detroit originally?" It was a simple question, the kind strangers asked each other to pass time. But for Sarah, it opened a floodgate of memories. She was from Detroit, born and raised on the city's northwest side in a neighborhood where the houses had front porches and the neighbors knew each other's names. Her parents, Robert and Catherine Mitchell, had been high school sweethearts who built a modest but happy life together. Her father worked for the Postal Service for 32 years, and her mother was a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital. "Yes," she said, setting down her spoon. "Born and raised." "You." East Side, Marcus replied. "Been here my whole life, except for 2 years in the Army right after high school." He paused, studying her face in the warm light of the diner. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want." Sarah tensed slightly, but nodded. She had learned that most questions from strangers led to places she didn't want to go, but something about Marcus's manner suggested he wasn't asking out of curiosity or judgment. "How long you been out there?" "On your own, I mean." The question hung between them like smoke. Sarah could lie, could deflect, could change the subject. She had become skilled at avoiding the truth, at protecting herself from the pity or fear that usually followed honesty. But sitting here in this warm booth with her belly full of soup for the first time in days, looking across at a man who had stopped his truck in the rain for no reason other than human decency, she found herself wanting to tell the truth. 3 months, she said quietly. 3 months, 2 weeks, and for days. The precision of her answer told Marcus everything he needed to know about how those days had been counted, how each one had been survived and cataloged in the way that only someone living hour by hour could understand. "What happened?" he asked. And there was no judgment in his voice, only the kind of gentle concern that invited honesty. Sarah looked out the window at the rain still streaking down the glass. Where did she begin? With the lump she found in the shower on an ordinary Tuesday morning? With the moment the doctor's face changed from routine to serious? With the first bill that arrived marked "past due" in red letters that seemed to mock her situation? "I got sick," she said finally. "Cancer. Breast cancer. And, in America, getting sick when you're poor is like falling down a hole with no bottom." Marcus nodded, and something in his expression told her he understood more than most people would. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "That's a hell of a thing to go through alone." "I wasn't alone at first," Sarah continued, surprising herself with her willingness to share. "I had friends, colleagues from the school where I taught. Everyone was very supportive in the beginning. They sent cards and brought casseroles and promised to be there for whatever I needed." She picked up her coffee cup and held it between her palms, using its warmth as an anchor. "But cancer isn't a sprint, you know? It's a marathon that keeps getting longer. And people get tired of running alongside you. They have their own lives, their own problems. And watching someone fight for their life every day, it makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them that bad things can happen to anyone. And most people don't want to be reminded of that." Marcus listened without interrupting, giving her the space to tell her story at her own pace. He had seen enough hardship in his own life to know that sometimes people just needed to be heard, to have their experience witnessed by another human being. "The treatments worked," Sarah continued. "The cancer is gone, or at least, it's in remission. But the bills never stopped coming. First, they took my savings. Then my car. Then my apartment. I tried to keep working through the treatments, but there were days when I couldn't get out of bed, days when the chemotherapy made me so sick I couldn't keep food down. The school was understanding at first, but There's only so much understanding a workplace can provide when you can't actually do the work. She set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Marcus. I lost my job, which meant I lost my insurance, which meant I couldn't afford the follow-up care I needed to stay healthy. And once you're behind on everything, once you're living paycheck to paycheck except there are no more paychecks, it happens faster than you think. One day you're a teacher with her own apartment and a 10-year plan, and the next day you're sitting in a doorway in the rain hoping someone will notice you're still human. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Marcus absorbed what she had told him, understanding now why she had been so hesitant to trust him, why she carried herself like someone who had learned that the world could be cruel without warning. "What did you teach?" he asked, and the question surprised her. Most people, when she told them about being homeless, focused on that part of her story. They wanted to know about life on the streets, about where she slept, and how she survived. But Marcus was asking about who she used to be, acknowledging that her identity was more than her current circumstances. "Third grade," she said, and for the first time since sitting down, she smiled. 8- and 9-year-olds. They're amazing at that age. Old enough to have real conversations, but young enough to still believe in magic. "I taught at Roosevelt Elementary for 6 years. I loved those kids like they were my own." "What's it like?" "Teaching, I mean." Sarah leaned back in the booth, and for a moment, the lines of exhaustion and worry faded from her face. "It's like being a gardener, I guess. You plant seeds and tend them and hope they grow into something beautiful. Some days you can see the progress, the moment when a child finally understands something that was confusing them. Other days you just have to have faith that the seeds are taking root, even when you can't see it happening." "Sounds like important work," Marcus said. "It is," Sarah replied, then added quietly, "It was." Marcus could hear the grief in her voice, the mourning for a life that felt as lost to her as if it belonged to someone else. He understood that grief because he had carried his own version of it, not from illness or poverty, though he had known both, but from the weight of dreams deferred and opportunities missed. "Tell me about you," Sarah said, turning the conversation away from herself. "What kind of construction do you do?" Marcus smiled, grateful for the change of subject, but also pleased that she was curious about his life. It suggested a level of comfort that hadn't been there an hour ago. "Commercial construction mostly. Office buildings, warehouses, that kind of thing. I'm a foreman now, which means I get to boss around guys who think they know better than me about how to pour concrete." He grinned. "It's honest work, and it pays well enough to keep a roof over my head and food on my table. Plus, there's something satisfying about building something that's going to be there long after you're gone." "Have you always done construction?" "Nah. I bounced around for a while after the army. Tried community college, worked retail, did some security work. But my uncle Raymond was a contractor, and he needed help on a job about 10 years ago. Said he'd teach me the trade if I was willing to work hard and learn. Best decision I ever made, working for Uncle Ray." "Is he still around?" Marcus's expression grew more serious. "He passed away 2 years ago. Heart attack. But he left me his tools and his truck, and more importantly, he left me his reputation. In construction, your name is everything. Uncle Ray's name meant quality work, fair dealing, and showing up when you say you will. I work every day to make sure I live up to that." Sarah could hear the love and respect in Marcus's voice when he talked about his uncle, and she felt a pang of longing for that kind of connection. Her parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, before her diagnosis, before her world fell apart. Sometimes she wondered if they were watching from somewhere, heartbroken to see what had become of the daughter they had raised with so much hope and love. "What about family?" she asked. "Besides your uncle, I mean." "Just my mom. She lives about 20 minutes from here, still in the house where I grew up. She works for the city now, in the clerk's office. Raised me and my sister by herself after my dad left when I was 12. "Your sister?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Keisha. She was 3 years younger than me. Died when she was 19. Drug overdose." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. She recognized the particular kind of pain that came with losing someone too young, someone who should have had decades ahead of them. "Thank you. It's been 13 years, but you never really get over something like that." Keisha was smart, funny, full of life. But She got mixed up with the wrong crowd in high school, started using my mom, and I tried everything we could think of to help her. But addiction is bigger than love, you know? It takes people no matter how much you fight for them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who had both learned that life could be beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Outside, the rain was finally beginning to ease, but neither of them seemed eager to leave the warmth of the diner. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said eventually. "Sure. Why did you really stop tonight? I mean, there are homeless people all over this city. What made you stop for me?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe it was because you reminded me of Keisha, or maybe it was because my mom always taught me to help people when I can. But I think, if I'm being really honest, it was because you looked like you were trying so hard to disappear, and I know what that feels like." "What do you mean?" "When I was a kid, after my dad left, there were times when we didn't have enough. Enough food, enough heat, enough money to keep the lights on. I got good at making myself small, at trying not to need too much or ask for too much. I learned to be grateful for scraps and to pretend everything was fine even when it wasn't." He paused, looking down at his hands. "When I saw you tonight, I saw that same look. Like you were trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that had already made it clear you weren't welcome. And I guess I wanted you to know that you are welcome, that you do deserve to take up space." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, and this time she didn't try to hide them. No one had told her she was welcome anywhere in so long that she had forgotten it was something a person could be. "Thank you," she whispered, and Marcus reached across the table to briefly squeeze her hand. "We all need somebody to remind us we matter," he said simply. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing. Sarah told him about her favorite books, about the student who had written her a poem about dandelions being the bravest flowers because they grew in cracks in the sidewalk. Marcus told her about the building he was most proud of constructing, a community center in his old neighborhood that would serve families like the one he had grown up in. They talked about Detroit, about the way the city had been knocked down and was slowly, stubbornly getting back up. They talked about their dreams, the ones they had given up, and the ones they still carried. And, slowly, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, they stopped being strangers sharing a meal and became two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. When Linda came by to refill their coffee cups for the third time, she smiled at them in a way that suggested she had seen this kind of connection before and recognized it for what it was. "You two seem to be having a nice conversation," she said warmly. After she walked away, Marcus and Sarah looked at each other and laughed, suddenly, aware that they had been talking for over 2 hours. The diner was nearly empty now, and the rain had stopped completely. "I should probably get going," Sarah said reluctantly, though she dreaded the thought of returning to the streets after this brief respite from her reality. "Where will you go?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was wrestling with a decision. "There's a shelter about 6 blocks from here, if they have space." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking hard about something. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression of determination mixed with nervousness. "I've got a couch," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. And I promise you'd be safe. I can't drive away knowing you're going back out there tonight." Sarah stared at him, overwhelmed by the offer. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to accept this incredible kindness from a man who had already given her more than anyone had in months. But another part of her, the part that had learned to be suspicious of motives and wary of debts she couldn't repay, held her back. "I couldn't," she said. "You've already done so much." "You could," Marcus said gently. "And I haven't done anything anyone else wouldn't do." "That's not true," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Most people would have driven past. Most people do drive past." "Well, I'm not most people," Marcus replied with a small smile. And neither are. Marcus's apartment was on the second floor of a brick building that had seen better days, but still held its dignity. The stairs creaked under their feet as they climbed, and Sarah noticed how Marcus took them too at a time despite carrying her small bag of belongings, a habit born from years of physical work. He unlocked the door marked 2B and stepped aside to let her enter first, a small gesture of courtesy that made her heart squeeze with unexpected emotion. The apartment was small but clean, with the kind of masculine simplicity that spoke of a man who didn't need much to be content. There was a brown leather couch that had probably seen a decade of use but was well maintained, a coffee table made from what looked like reclaimed wood, and a television mounted on the wall above a modest entertainment center. The kitchen was visible from the living room, separated only by a breakfast bar with 2 stools. Everything was neat and organized, the home of someone who understood the value of taking care of what he had. "It's not much," Marcus said, suddenly self-conscious as he saw his space through the eyes of a visitor. "But it's home." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and she meant it. After months of doorways and shelters and park benches, this ordinary apartment felt like a palace. More than that, it felt like what she had almost forgotten existed, a sanctuary, a place where someone could close the door against the world and just be. Marcus set her bag down by the couch and busied himself gathering blankets and pillows from a closet in the hallway. "Bathroom's right there," he said, pointing to a door off the living room. "Towels are in the cabinet under the sink." "And Sarah?" He paused in his gathering to look at her directly. "Make yourself at home. Whatever you need, just help yourself." The bathroom was small but spotless, with a medicine cabinet that held the basics: toothpaste, deodorant, a bottle of aspirin. But what caught Sarah's attention was the shower. She stared at it like it was made of gold, remembering what it felt like to stand under hot water, to feel truly clean, to wash away not just dirt, but the accumulated weight of too many hard days. "Marcus," she called through the door. "Yeah. Would it be okay if I take a shower?" There was a pause, and then his voice came back warm with understanding. "Of course. Take as long as you need. There's shampoo and soap in there, and I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They'll be too big, but they're clean." Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of privacy, of a lock between her and the world. She turned on the water and stood there watching steam fill the small room, then slowly began to undress. Her reflection in the mirror stopped her cold. She had avoided mirrors for months, but now she couldn't escape the reality of what the streets had done to her body. She was too thin, her ribs clearly visible beneath pale skin. Her hair was dull and tangled, her face hollow and marked with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. But as she stepped under the spray of hot water, something magical happened. The heat seemed to reach places in her soul that had been frozen for months. She stood there for a long time, just letting the water run over her, washing away layers of grime and fear and the accumulated shame of being invisible for so long. She shampooed her hair twice, conditioned it with a bottle of something that smelled like mint, and used a bar of soap that was simple and clean and perfect. When she finally turned off the water, she felt more like herself than she had in months. Outside the door, she found a stack of clothes as promised. Marcus's apartment was on the second floor of a brick building that had seen better days, but still held its dignity. The stairs creaked under their feet as they climbed, and Sarah noticed how Marcus took them too at a time despite carrying her small bag of belongings, a habit born from years of physical work. He unlocked the door marked 2B and stepped aside to let her enter first, a small gesture of courtesy that made her heart squeeze with unexpected emotion. The apartment was small but clean, with the kind of masculine simplicity that spoke of a man who didn't need much to be content. There was a brown leather couch that had probably seen a decade of use but was well maintained, a coffee table made from what looked like reclaimed wood, and a television mounted on the wall above a modest entertainment center. The kitchen was visible from the living room, separated only by a breakfast bar with 2 stools. Everything was neat and organized, the home of someone who understood the value of taking care of what he had. "It's not much," Marcus said, suddenly self-conscious as he saw his space through the eyes of a visitor. "But it's home." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and she meant it. After months of doorways and shelters and park benches, this ordinary apartment felt like a palace. More than that, it felt like what she had almost forgotten existed, a sanctuary, a place where someone could close the door against the world and just be. Marcus set her bag down by the couch and busied himself gathering blankets and pillows from a closet in the hallway. Bathroom's right there, he said, pointing to a door off the living room. Towels are in the cabinet under the sink. And Sarah? He paused in his gathering to look at her directly. Make yourself at home. Whatever you need, just help yourself. The bathroom was small but spotless, with a medicine cabinet that held the basics: toothpaste, deodorant, a bottle of aspirin. But what caught Sarah's attention was the shower. She stared at it like it was made of gold, remembering what it felt like to stand under hot water, to feel truly clean, to wash away not just dirt, but the accumulated weight of too many hard days. Marcus, she called through the door. Yeah. Would it be okay if I take a shower? There was a pause, and then his voice came back warm with understanding. Of course. Take as long as you need. There's shampoo and soap in there, and I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They'll be too big, but they're clean. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of privacy, of a lock between her and the world. She turned on the water and stood there watching steam fill the small room, then slowly began to undress. Her reflection in the mirror stopped her cold. She had avoided mirrors for months, but now she couldn't escape the reality of what the streets had done to her body. She was too thin, her ribs clearly visible beneath pale skin. Her hair was dull and tangled, her face hollow and marked with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. But as she stepped under the spray of hot water, something magical happened. The heat seemed to reach places in her soul that had been frozen for months. She stood there for a long time, just letting the water run over her, washing away layers of grime and fear and the accumulated shame of being invisible for so long. She shampooed her hair twice, conditioned it with a bottle of something that smelled like mint, and used a bar of soap that was simple and clean and perfect. When she finally turned off the water, she felt more like herself than she had in months. Outside the door, she found a stack of clothes as promised you. Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of hidden agenda, any hint that this kindness came with strings attached. But all she saw was genuine concern and an offer of help from one human being to another. Okay, she said finally, the word barely audible. If you're sure. I'm sure, Marcus said, and his smile was like sunrise after the longest night she had ever lived through. SDM in the first place. No thanks necessary, he said. We all need help sometimes. And in that moment, sitting in a diner booth across from a stranger who had shown her more kindness than she had experienced in months, Sarah began to believe that maybe her story wasn't over yet. Maybe this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that started with rain and kindness, and the simple act of two people sharing a warm meal on a cold night. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Danny's diner, something beautiful was beginning to bloom. Neither Marcus nor Sarah knew it yet, but this was the moment their lives would forever be divided into before and after. Before the night, a construction worker stopped for a homeless woman in the rain, and after the night, two broken souls found something in each other that neither knew they were looking for.